Hello YouTube! In this video I'm going to look at the concept of reality. What things are real? What is reality? This is a question that underlies many philosophical topics. Philosophers debate whether God is real, whether objective moral values are real, whether ordinary objects like hands are real. But, of course, these debates prompt the question, well, what is reality? What is it for something to be real? Interestingly, despite how central this is to philosophy, it's not a question that's been dealt with in a lot of detail, at least not directly. But I'll do my best to outline some of the views here. Now, before we get into this, of course, here is an advert. If you like my channel, you can support me on Patreon or send a donation via PayPal. Any help you can give, it's really very much appreciated. I offer private tutoring. Please email me for more on that. And I have a Discord server. Join the Discord. Come along and talk about philosophy with other people. Okay then, with that said, let's get to the topic and let's talk about reality. So, first of all then, there's a very strong connection, it seems, between reality and existence. So we might be inclined to say, look, reality is just everything that exists. Whatever exists is real, whatever exists is part of reality. Now, this, of course, raises the question, what is existence? Now, in fact, there is a kind of standard philosophical line on existence, which is that existence is not a property, or at least existence is not a property of things. So, what does this mean? Well, the basic idea is that the notion of existence adds nothing more to our conception of an object. So here's a famous quote from Kant. He says, and I quote, "When I think a thing, through whichever and however many predicates I like, even in its thoroughgoing determination, not the least bit gets added to the thing when I posit in addition that this thing is. For otherwise what would exist would not be the same as what I had thought in my concept, but more than that, and I could not say that the very object of my concept exists." Okay, so what's going on here? Well, consider an apple. The apple has various properties. It is green, it is sweet, it is hard and crunchy, it grew on a tree. Now suppose, in addition, that the apple exists. Well, does this add anything to your way of conceiving of the apple? I mean, it doesn't seem to, right? I mean, think about it this way. Let's say that I ask you to imagine two apples that differ only in that one of them exists and the other does not. Now, when you imagine these two apples, is there any conceivable difference at all? Okay, you're appending the word exists to one of the apples and not to the other, but that doesn't seem to change anything about the way you actually think about the apples. I mean, you seem to be imagining two completely identical apples, right? What's that, like the content that's in your mind seems totally identical, whether you imagine one as existent and the other as non-existent. That doesn't seem to make a difference to your conception of the apple. So, okay, the thought then is, well, to instantiate a property requires existence. If we're claiming that something has any properties at all, then that thing must exist. Existence is not some further property of a thing in addition to all of the other properties it has. So if the apple is green, then the apple exists because it instantiates the property of greenness. And on this view, a claim like apples exist, okay, what does that mean? Well, that just means some things are apples, right? To say that apples exist is to say that the property of being an apple is instantiated. And of course that will involve the instantiation of further properties. It will involve the instantiation of greenness, sweetness, and so on. But it's not that apples have the property of existence, strictly speaking. And similarly, when I say unicorns do not exist, this just means no things are unicorns. The property of being a unicorn is not instantiated. If we count up everything that there is, we will not find any unicorns. Okay, so this is the idea, and I mean another way to sort of argue for this view that existence is not a property is to consider what we would have to say if existence were a property. So suppose that existence were a property. Well, in that case, when we say something like unicorns do not exist, our statement picks out unicorns and it denies that they have the property of existence. Analogously, when we say dogs are not green, our statement picks out dogs and it denies that they have the property of greenness. Okay, well, that's fair enough. I mean, we can refer to dogs, we can talk about what properties they have and what properties they lack. But in the case of existence claims, this procedure looks a bit weird. So take unicorns do not exist again. Okay, we're saying this picks out unicorns, it sort of refers to unicorns, it denotes unicorns, and it denies that they have the property of existence. Well, how could I pick out objects that do not exist? How could I refer to or denote objects that do not exist? I mean, what I seem to be saying is there are unicorns and they do not exist. But to say that there are unicorns seems equivalent to saying that unicorns exist. I mean, at the very least, there's something odd about the idea that there are things that don't exist. Like, there are things that I can refer to, that I can pick out, but those things don't exist. What a lot of philosophers will want to say is there's just nothing more to reality than what exists. So it can't be that there are things that don't exist. I mean, obviously yes, it's true that unicorns do not exist, but what is it that makes this true? Presumably, it's not going to be true in virtue of picking out unicorns and then correctly ascribing the property of non-existence, because there are no unicorns to pick out. Right? That's what it has to mean when we say that unicorns do not exist, right? So the solution here is that existence is not a property, or at least existence is not a property of objects. Instead, unicorns do not exist just means there are no unicorns. Nothing has the property of being a unicorn, or nothing has the property of being a horse and having a single horn projecting from its forehead. So unicorns do not exist. That doesn't pick out unicorns and attribute non-existence to them. It just denies that anything is a unicorn. So, okay then, what does all of this tell us about reality? Well, I mean, on the one hand, we might think, look, from this point of view, there really isn't much to be said in answer to the question, what is reality? So reality is whatever exists, but existence is not a property. There's nothing substantive to be said about existence, so there's nothing substantive to be said about what's real, or what it is for something to be real. We establish what's real by looking for what properties are instantiated, and that's all. On the other hand, this arguably leaves various questions open. I mean, one general difficulty here is that if when we say X exists, that just means that there are X's, or the property of Xness is instantiated. So, apples exist just means there are apples, or the property of being an apple is instantiated. Well, now we can ask, okay, what properties are instantiated? And in particular, from the philosophical point of view, we can ask, what is it for a property to be instantiated? What the hell does that mean? So we have this kind of set of connected terms here where we're saying, like, X is real means that X exists means that some property is instantiated, the property of Xness is instantiated. So we've got, reality, existence, property instantiation. What are these things? I mean, one way to push this question is to think about unicorns again. We said it's true that unicorns do not exist, which is to say there are no unicorns. If we count up everything, we're not going to find any unicorns. Well, why not? Why shouldn't we accept if somebody produces a list of things and adds unicorns to that list, why shouldn't we accept that list? I mean, the issue here is not about our sort of first order evidence for unicorns. Obviously, we don't believe in unicorns, and that's probably on the basis of perception. We've observed the world and we haven't seen any unicorns. We haven't seen any horse-like creatures with horns protruding from their foreheads. Okay, but, what is this thing? Like, why does that mean that there are no unicorns, that unicorns do not exist, or that the property is not instantiated? What is it? What is it for something to for some property to be instantiated or not to be instantiated, or for something not to exist? This question still seems to be open. So let's consider some other ways of thinking about reality. David Chalmers, in his book Reality Plus, briefly outlines a few options, a few ways of thinking about what it means for something to be real. So I'll note a couple of those. First of all, there is the causal power view, or what's sometimes called the Eleatic principle. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. Eleatic? I don't know. But anyway, this principle says that to be real is to have causal powers. So X is real just in case X has causal powers. X can cause changes in other things. It can produce a change in other things, or it is a causal effect of other things. So maybe it doesn't necessarily have its own causal powers, but it might be that it is caused by other things. Basically, reality is a causal web of things affecting other things and being affected by other things. So what's real is what's in this causal web. And certainly this seems like a criterion that we use to guide us in our everyday existence claims. When I throw a stone at a window, the stone causes the window to break. So I believe that the stone and the window are real. If I can show that an object has caused a change in something else, then it looks like I'm committed to the existence of that object. What about unicorns? Well, unicorns don't exist because unicorns don't have causal powers. It's only the stories about unicorns that have causal powers. The stories have the power to produce changes in people's mental states. You know, I can mentally picture unicorns and play around with those mental images. So stories about unicorns are real, mental images of unicorns are real, but unicorns themselves are not real. When I form the mental image of a unicorn, there's not really an animal in front of me. Okay, a couple of issues with this proposal. First of all, this rules out the possibility that there might be non-causal objects, in particular abstract objects. Abstract objects are usually, by definition, taken to be non-spatio-temporal and non-causal. So mathematical Platonists, for instance, will say that mathematical objects exist and are abstract, numbers and sets, for example. So think about the proposition, there are 4 prime numbers between 10 and 20. This proposition is true. And according to mathematical Platonists, what makes this proposition true is that there really are numbers, and these numbers exist independently of us, and some of those numbers really are primes. So that there really are 4 prime numbers between 10 and 20. But numbers don't enter into causal relations. I mean, of course, we can apply mathematics to the causal world. So we might use numbers to count objects that do enter into causal relations. I can say, for instance, that there are 11 books in this room. Obviously, books have causal powers. But the number 11, considered in itself, is an abstract object. Like when I say that there are 11 books in the room, I mean, I'm perceiving the books, but I'm not perceiving the number 11 itself. And I'm certainly not perceiving the primeness of the number 11. So the number 11, considered in itself, is an abstract object. It doesn't exist in space and time. It doesn't have causal powers. None of its properties are causal. But, I mean, a mathematical Platonist would say it exists. It's part of reality. And there are plenty of other philosophical views that commit to abstract objects. Moral non-naturalists often take moral properties to be abstract and so non-causal. Now, obviously these sorts of views are controversial. There are plenty of objections to mathematical Platonism and moral non-naturalism, but we presumably don't want to rule out such views merely on the basis of how we are defining the term reality. I mean, the mathematical Platonist has arguments in favour of the existence of abstract objects. If those arguments are sound, then there are real things that do not have causal powers. So a second issue with the causality proposal is that causality itself is the subject of much debate. What exactly is causality? Well, there's no consensus on that. Moreover, there are some philosophers who deny that causality is fundamental. Perhaps causality is emergent from deeper properties, maybe the properties of quantum fields or strings or something. That kind of view is taken seriously in philosophy of physics. There are even philosophers who deny that there is any causality at all. Or maybe causality is not sort of part of the external world. Maybe causal relations are projected onto events that are actually just non-causal. Most famously, David Hume articulated a kind of anti-realist view of causality. I will link a video in the description that covers some of the philosophical challenges to causality. Again, it seems like we don't want to rule out these views merely by the way that we're defining reality. Of course, if you think that the world is fundamentally non-causal, and you endorse the causal view, then it turns out that you'd be committed to the claim that there just is no reality, which is, I suppose, is an interesting position, but probably not one that most philosophers would want to hold. So, okay, this is one issue with the causality approach. There's perhaps a deeper issue here, which is, let's think about unicorns again. So the claim is that unicorns are not real because unicorns don't have causal powers. Okay, but why should we accept this claim? I mean, we might argue, actually, unicorns do have causal powers. They do all kinds of things. Unicorns can eat grass. They can trot through woodland. They can use their horns to heal sickness. I mean, now, this is what the stories about unicorns tell us. What we want to say is, well, unicorns don't have causal powers because unicorns aren't actually real. So I guess the thought is, look, like the argument might be that reality or the judgment of whether or not something is real is conceptually prior in some sense to the judgment of causality. If we judged that unicorns were real, then we would ascribe causal powers to them. Unicorns are the kind of things that would have causal powers if they were real. It is because we take them not to be real that they do not have causal powers, or that we say that they don't have causal powers. So, you know, so if we're to say, if we're sort of explaining reality in terms of causal power, if we're saying, well, something is real because it does have causal powers, something isn't real because it doesn't have causal powers, that arguably puts the cart before the horse, or it puts the cart before the unicorn, right? So, so yeah, I mean, the argument is it kind of gets the order of explanation wrong. All right then, another view that's mentioned by Chalmers is the mind independence view. So the idea here is that reality is what there is, independently of the mind. When we say that something is real, what we mean is that even if we eliminated minds, the thing in question would not go away, it would still be there. Now, I should note that this does track pretty, fairly well with how we use the term realism in philosophy. So if you talk about mathematical realism in philosophy, that usually is taken to mean the view that there are mind-independent mathematical facts. Mathematics is discovered, not invented by us. Moral realism means that there are mind-independent moral facts. Morality is discovered, not invented by us. I mean, as a kind of explanation or theory of what reality is, I think we can deal with this idea fairly briefly. So, yes, granted, sometimes we use the word real to ascribe mind independence, but that's quite a narrow definition of reality, and is, I mean, it seems pretty inadequate if taken as an answer to the question, what is reality? Because minds are part of reality, and the things created or constituted by minds are part of reality as well. Money is mind dependent because money is created and sustained by minds, but money is part of reality. Mental images are even more obviously mind dependent, right? I mean, without a mind to sustain it, a mental image would immediately be destroyed, but mental images are part of reality. If anything, minds and mind dependent things are probably the parts of reality that are of most significance to us, at least in our everyday lives. Perhaps we can frame the mind independence view in slightly different terms. We might say, well, reality is what there is what is there, regardless of what an individual thinks or believes about it. So there's a thought here where you might say, look, if I believe in unicorns, if I form the belief that there are unicorns, unicorns do not become real. I just have a false belief. If I stop believing that there are apples, apples do not cease to exist. Again, I just have a false belief. Indeed, if I stop believing in minds, as is the case for some eliminative materialists, or I stop believing in money, well, minds and money will still exist. Again, I just have a false belief. So we might think of reality in terms of like true or false beliefs. In fact, there are a couple of different ways of elaborating on this. So we can sort of see a couple of options for kind of taking reality to be a matter of like true belief, as it were. So one way to do this, so one way to build on this idea that reality is connected in a deep way with true belief is that reality is non-illusoriness. Again, think about how we talk about reality in everyday life. An important component is the distinction between reality and illusion. When we ask, is this thing real? Another way to put the question might be to ask, is this thing really as it seems to be? So as David Chalmers puts it, summarizing this view, he says, something is real when it is the way it seems, something is not real when it's not the way it seems. Okay, so compare reality with dreams. Let's say I'm perceiving an apple in my daily life. The apple is real because things are as they seem to be. There is a solid spherical object in front of me causing my perceptual data. I mean, at least that's the story many people are inclined to tell. In this case, I have a true belief. I believe that I am observing an object independent of me with particular properties, and there is such an object there. By contrast, when I dream of perceiving an apple, there isn't actually a solid spherical object in front of me. I'm actually asleep in my bed. Things are not the way they seem to be. I have a false belief. I believe that there's an apple in front of me, but everybody can see that in fact there is no apple, and upon waking, I will also come to believe that in fact there is no apple. So we have this kind of distinction between reality and illusion, and you know, that sort of tells us what reality is. And so reality is a matter of what we have a true belief about. Now, the concern with this, I mean, again, this is kind of similar to the concern that was raised with the previous two views, but it still seems to presuppose some criterion of reality, because the obvious question here is, well, why are we taking it that things are as they seem to be in the perception case, but not in the dream case? Why, in the dream case, can't we say that there really is a solid spherical object in front of me? Of course, I mean, so it's easy to explain the reasons people will give for why they don't say that. When I dream of seeing an apple, well, for one thing, other people do not see the apple, right? Like, so I'm taking it that there's this object in front of me, but other people looking at me see me asleep in bed, and they can see that my eyes are closed and that there is no object in front of me. So other people don't see the apple. Similarly then, when I wake up, I myself will stop seeing the apple. I wake up and I find myself in bed and there's no apple in front of me. That's fine, but there are at least two interpretations of this situation. So the first thing we can say about this is that, well, there is no apple. I'm merely dreaming of an apple that isn't real. That's the sort of standard interpretation, right? But the second thing we might say, the second interpretation is, we could say, well, no, the dream apple is real, but this apple only appears to me under particular circumstances. Now, in fact, this is not fundamentally different to the apples I perceive in waking life. If I switch off the lights or pump smoke into the room or remove my eyes, I will no longer see the apple. I mean, the dream apple is, perhaps it's more fragile in a sense. It appears under a more narrow range of conditions, and it is present only to me. But none of that entails, or at least it doesn't obviously entail, that the dream apple is not real, that there is not really a solid spherical object in front of me. Why not take it that it seems like you could just grant all of this, but then still say, no, the dream apple is real. There really is an object there. I mean, recall that one of the difficulties for the causality view is that we say that unicorns don't have causal powers because unicorns aren't real. So the judgment that unicorns aren't real seems to be prior in some sense to the denial of causal power. So arguably we're in a similar position in the case of distinguishing veridical experience from illusory experience. When I'm dreaming of an apple, this is illusory because the apple isn't real. So the judgment that the apple isn't real seems to be conceptually prior in some sense to the denial that the experience is veridical. So does this, again, does this give us a grasp of what reality is? Maybe not. Okay, so we've suggested that reality is connected in some deep way with true belief. One way of elaborating this is to think of, reality in terms of this distinction between veridical experience and illusory experience. Let's think of an alternative way of elaborating this, which we might call a kind of pragmatic view. So we've been asking this question, what is reality? But maybe this is a sort of inappropriate place to start. So think about how, in practice, we go about inquiring into reality, right? Like, how do we actually go about forming beliefs about reality? Well, we probably are going to start with the question, what is our best theory? What is our best theory of the world? We develop theories of the world, and then we test those theories against various theoretical virtues. So we want theories that accommodate our observations, that successfully predict new observations, that are logically consistent, that are simple and easy to apply, that bear systematic explanatory connections to other theories we accept, and so on. And then whichever theory scores best on these virtues is the theory we accept. And that tells us what reality is, right? Reality is just, so what we take to be reality is just whatever is postulated by or described by or quantified over in our best theories, where what counts as the best theory is fixed by these theoretical virtues. Okay, so with that said then, contrast the perceived apple with the dream apple. When I perceive an apple, what's going on here? Well, in this situation, we have a detailed theory of human visual perception. This theory explains how light interacts with external objects, explains how this light then creates patterns of activation in the cells of the retina, which then sends information down the optic nerve, and so on. Very detailed understanding of the perceptual system. We have a detailed theory of how apples are grown, of the role that they play in the reproduction of trees, and of the evolutionary history of apples. We understand how to use apples in various activities like cooking. I mean, we understand how to selectively breed different varieties and how they interact with potential pests and so on. Basically, we have a detailed, systematic knowledge of both apples and of how apples are perceived. So, of course, when I seem to perceive an apple, I believe that there is an apple, that the apple is real. When I take the dream apple, I dream of perceiving an apple. Suppose I were to claim that this dream apple is real. Well, now there's a host of very tricky questions. So, how am I getting any information about this apple? How am I receiving visual information about it? I don't know. Nobody knows. My eyes are closed after all, so it's not normal visual perception. Where did this dream apple come from? Again, I don't know. I have no idea what the history of these apples is, or of what these apples, how these apples kind of interact with other types of objects like trees and so on. What can I do with this dream apple? How can I manipulate it to achieve various ends? Again, no idea. Dream apples need not behave anything like the apples we perceive in everyday life. Moreover, if I say that this apple is real, I mean, arguably I might be committed to just outright inconsistencies. So I'm saying there is an apple in front of me, but at the same time, I'm sleeping in bed and there are only bed sheets in front of me. How can these two claims be squared? There's at least prima facie a problem there. I suppose I have to say that maybe I guess when I look at the apple, I'm perceiving some other aspect of reality that's not part of the same spatio-temporal realm as waking life or something like that. Maybe that's a way out of the inconsistency. So the point is, there's just a host of problems with saying that this apple is real. When in waking life I perceive an apple, our best theory of the world tells us that there is an apple, so the apple is real. When I dream of an apple, our best theory of the world tells us there isn't an apple, it's just a dream image. So the perceived apple is part of reality and the dream apple is not. And that's it. There's nothing more to be said about that. So basically the thought is, look, when we affirm that something is real, what we're really doing is affirming that our beliefs about that thing cohere well enough with our other beliefs and experiences. And there's really just nothing more to be said. Okay, so there's an obvious objection to this picture, which is, we might think, well, look, surely there could be, in principle, a theory that scores best on the theoretical virtues, but that is nevertheless misleading. Because, look, there is an independent reality out there, and even our best theory might provide an incorrect description of it. We could all be mistaken. We can kind of imagine, Descartes' evil demon, right? Descartes' evil demon setting things up so that our experiences kind of suggest one type of theory, but actually reality is just completely different. That seems logically possible. So we can't say that reality is just whatever is postulated or described by our best theory. And in fact, in practice, we know that our current best theories are not perfect. We expect our current best theories will change. So yeah, I mean, like, if we imagine, the best theory, if we kind of project ourselves to the end of inquiry, it seems like even then, that theory might still be mistaken. It might fail to describe reality. So, obviously, this is something that the kind of pragmatic view is going to have to deny. And what the defender of this view might say is, well, okay, yes, obviously our actual theories might fail to match reality, but in practice, what does this mean, right? What's going on when we make the judgment that a theory might fail to match reality? Well, what it means is that further evidence might be acquired that tells against the theory. So if we take our best theories of the world, we can imagine that we might make new discoveries that would challenge those theories. And we can always imagine this happening, no matter how good our theories are. So even if we were to reach the end of inquiry, as it were, even if we were to develop a perfect theory, we could still imagine that the theory is imperfect and that new observations might be made that would falsify it. I can imagine a series of experiences that would convince me to say, oh, I've been deceived by an evil demon. Like if I have a certain series of experiences, I can imagine kind of coming to the belief that everything that's happened before in my life is the product of a deception by an evil demon, or that or that I've always been a brain in a vat, or I've always been in the Matrix, or something like that. And so, on the basis of these sorts of considerations, on the basis of imagining experiences that might falsify the theories I accept, I speak of this, reality independent of a theory. But this notion of reality independent of theory, that's something which is based on my ability to conceive of experiences that falsify the theory. So even when I'm imagining this, I'm not accessing some independent reality. I'm imagining further experiences. So then the basic idea of this kind of pragmatic view is we never have any access to some independent reality. Not only can we not access an independent reality, we can't really even conceive of it. What we have are just experiences and theories of experiences, and those theories can do better or worse with respect to the theoretical virtues, and that defines what reality is. Whenever we try to imagine reality as something independent of the best theory, what we're really imagining are a series of possible experiences that would falsify the theory, or that would at least be in some sort of tension with the theory. There's just no other way to even assign a meaning to the notion of reality, because look, at the end of the day, we can never sort of step outside of ourselves and check that our beliefs correspond to, what's really there, as it were. There is no sense to be made of that. So with that said, let's consider the objection again. The objection was that the best theory might still fail to match reality. But according to the pragmatic view, the only conception we have of a theory failing to match reality, the only way to assign any content to that idea is, well, we can conceive of experiences. So experiences occur that are in tension with the theory. But if we're supposing that there are experiences that are in tension with the theory, then it's not the best theory, because by definition, the best theory is empirically adequate. The best theory correctly describes all experiences. So really, look, the question is, so one question here is, could it turn out that what we think is the best theory is not actually the best theory? So like if we say that, if we have a theory and we say, oh yes, this theory scores perfectly on all the theoretical virtues, we can't improve on it, could we be wrong about that? Well, yes, of course. We might believe that some theory is empirically adequate, that some theory correctly describes all experiences, but then we have some experiences that are incompatible with the theory. That could happen. But could it turn out that the genuinely best theory, so if we have a theory that genuinely is the best, that is, perfectly empirically adequate, that is simple, that has great explanatory power, if it really does score the best on these explanatory virtues, could it turn out that this theory fails to match reality? Well, on the pragmatist view, we we don't even have any idea of what this would even mean. So no. So yeah, that's one way. That's one option, right? Like on this kind of view, we start off with the question of, well, what's the best theory, and then that just, and then the judgment of what's real just follows from that, and there's nothing more to be said. Well, that's, I think, the end of this video. Obviously, I'm sure there's many other options here, other possible views people might take, but that's all I'm going to talk about for today. And I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.